You know that feeling when you land on a website and it's like talking to a robot? Everything is perfectly polished and somehow feels cold. It's like all formal language, stock photos of people in suits shaking hands, and a generic solutions provider copy that could be about any business anywhere. We've all seen that website, and if you're anything like me, you click away pretty quickly. Now, I want you to think about the last time you visited a website that felt completely different. Like you were on a relaxing walk having a chat with a friend who really gets you. The kind of site where you find yourself nodding along thinking, yes, they understand exactly what I'm dealing with. That connection is not an accident. It's the result of intentional design and copy choices that put human connection first. In this episode of Think Inside the Square, I'm sharing how you can transform your website from a stoic digital business card into an inviting space that creates genuine connections with your visitors. You'll learn some of my favorite practical strategies to make your website feel more human, more authentic, and more effective at building real relationships with your audience 24/7. Welcome to Think Inside the Square, a podcast full of tips and tricks to help you create a website that you're proud of. I'm your host, Becca Harpain, Squarespace expert and educator and creator of InsideTheSquare.co. And in this episode, we're diving into the art and science of designing websites that foster genuine human connections. For a transcript of this episode, along with the links to any resources mentioned, visit InsideTheSquare.co/podcast. This episode of Think Inside the Square is sponsored by me, Inside the Square. I've started offering one-on-one Squarespace strategy sessions, and I wanted to make sure that you knew about it. If you need help planning your website content, creating some custom code, or maybe brainstorming the perfect way to share your course or membership on Squarespace, I'm here to help. You can book your very own Squarespace strategy session with me at InsideTheSquare.co/strategy, and we can work together to make Squarespace uniquely yours. That's InsideTheSquare.co/strategy. Now, on to the episode. As website designers and business owners, when we're creating that space on the web, we often get caught up in the technical details, the perfect color palette, the ideal font pairing, the latest design trends. But sometimes we can forget that at its core, a website is not just a collection of pretty pages. It's a conversation with our visitors. And just like any good conversation, it needs to be natural, authentic, and human. In this episode, we're going to explore 4 key areas that can transform how people experience your website. I'm going to be talking about understanding the psychology behind human connection in web design, how to implement design elements that foster genuine engagement, how to build trust through authentic content and storytelling, and I'll be sharing some practical steps that you can take today to make your site feel more human. These strategies work whether you're a solo entrepreneur, a creative professional, or running a large business. Even something super corporate can benefit from a little human connection, especially in this world of rapid AI expansion. Humans are craving more connection than ever because at the end of the day, people don't connect with a business, they connect with other people. So let's start by talking about why human connection matters so much in terms of web design. Yes, your website is there to showcase your products or your services and get sales, but maybe you share a plethora of information in the hopes that your site is noted as the #1 resource on a specific subject. That overall purpose is a huge part of it, but there's something fascinating that I've noticed throughout my career as a web designer. The sites that convert the best aren't necessarily the ones with the fanciest features or the most polished design. They're the ones that make visitors feel understood and valued. Think about how you make decisions in your own life, like you're choosing between 2 similar products or services. What is it that actually tips the scale? More often than not, it's that feeling of connection, that sense that one brand or business just gets you better than the other. Maybe it's the stellar reviews. Maybe it's a product description that sounds exactly like that voice in your head. Or maybe it's a layout that shares content in such a smooth way that it answers all of your questions before you even think of them. I experienced this firsthand when I started Inside the Square years ago. Every tutorial I created in the beginning was so over-the-top technical. I didn't even show my face in my videos for the first 6 months. I had all of these tutorials, all of this technical content about Squarespace, and my analytics showed that I was starting to get some traffic, but people were not engaging with it the way that I hoped. This was back when SEO was still a critical part of web design and business, and I was seeing my visits increase because I knew how to make Google happy, but there was nothing there for the actual humans visiting my site. The information was solid, but something was missing. So I started adding more personal touches. I started sharing stories about why I created certain tutorials, admitting when I struggled with a particular feature, even including little notes about mistakes I had made along the way. And you know what happened? Comments increased. Email signups doubled. I started getting messages from people saying things like, finally, someone who explains this stuff like a real person. It wasn't about dumbing things down or being less professional. It was about being more authentically human. That's why I created the style of teaching that you see in my tutorials today. My approach to sharing my custom codes is personal. It's dynamic. It's not just about sharing the information, but it's about sharing the excitement and the potential that custom code gives to us Squarespacers. Now, this brings me to something really important about human psychology and websites. We are all wired for connection. Our brains are literally designed to respond to other humans, to seek out similarities, to look for signs that we're in the right place, that we found our community. When your website feels too polished, too perfect, too corporate, it can actually trigger a subtle sense of distrust in your visitor's mind. Think about it like going to a networking event. When someone approaches you with a perfectly rehearsed elevator pitch, speaking in buzzwords and corporate jargon, how do you feel? Do you even want to continue the conversation? If you're like me, you probably feel a little bit uncomfortable. But when someone starts a genuine conversation, maybe even shares a relatable struggle or a funny story about their business journey, you naturally lean in. You want to hear more. Your website needs to be more like that second person, the one who starts real conversations. And here's the cool part. You can create this feeling systematically through your design choices. This is not about throwing professionalism out the window or sharing your whole life story. This is about finding those strategic moments where you can inject personality, share genuine insights, and create those yes, exactly kind of moments from your visitors. The key here is that creating human connection on your website isn't about a complete overhaul of your brand or sharing every detail of your personal life. This is strategic vulnerability, choosing specific moments to show the human side of your business in ways that actually strengthen your professional credibility rather than diminishing it. So how do we actually create these moments of connection and weave them into our design? Let's break down some specific elements that can transform your website from a digital brochure into an engaging experience. First up, I want to talk about your site's voice. And I don't just mean the words you write. Every design element on a page communicates something. Your typography, your color choices, the white space, they all work together to set the tone for your conversation with your visitors. Think about the difference between Times New Roman and a hand-drawn font. One says formal document, while the other says creative expression. Now, neither is wrong, but they create very different emotional responses. Choose elements that match the type of connection that you want to create with your audience. Color plays a huge role here too. I see a lot of websites using really trendy color palettes because they look modern and professional. Maybe they switched everything over to neon because that's one of the design trends they've been reading about. And while there's nothing wrong with that, sometimes we forget to ask ourselves, does this color palette actually reflect the feeling I want my visitors to have when they land on my site? Here's a practical example from my own website. When I first started InsideTheSquare.co, I used lots of blues and grays because that felt techy and professional. But when I really thought about my mission, making code feel accessible and even fun, I realized that those colors were working against me. They were making custom code feel a lot more intimidating, not less. So now I use brighter, more playful colors in my design elements that match my teaching style. Now, one of my favorite techniques for making a website feel more human is adding interactive elements that invite engagement. Think about things like hover effects that reveal personal notes or insights, almost like sharing a secret with your visitors. Or maybe you can progressively reveal more content as someone shows interest in a topic, similar to how a natural conversation unfolds. Even small interactive touches, like having elements respond thoughtfully to user actions, can make your site feel more alive and responsive. And don't forget about adding prompts or questions throughout your content to encourage your visitors to pause and reflect, just like you would in a real conversation. The key with all of these elements is intentionality. Every design choice should serve your goal of creating genuine connection. It's not about adding personality just for the sake of it. It's about using design strategically to make your visitors feel seen and understood. Speaking of being seen and understood, let's talk about how to build trust through authentic content and storytelling. You can have the most beautifully designed website in the world, but if your content doesn't feel genuine, people will be able to sense it immediately. Let me share something that changed everything for my website. For the longest time, I thought that I needed to present myself as this perfect, all-knowing Squarespace expert. I would spend hours making sure every tutorial I published was flawless. Every piece of content was completely polished. But do you know what actually helped my audience connect with me more? When I started sharing the process and including my mistakes. Now, when I create a tutorial, I don't edit out the part where I make a typo in my code. Instead, I walk through how I troubleshoot it. Because guess what? That's real life. That's what happens when you work with code. Every time I include these moments, I get comments from people saying how refreshing it is to see someone else make the same mistakes that they do. This approach to authenticity can work for any type of business. If you're a service provider, share some behind the scenes of your process, including the challenges. If you're selling products, tell the story of why you created them, what problems you're trying to solve. These stories create connection points for your audience. The goal here isn't to overshare or make your website feel unprofessional. I want to reiterate that. It's not about being unprofessional. This is about being strategically authentic, choosing the right moments to pull back the curtain and show the human side of your business. Because when you do this effectively, you're not just building trust, you're creating advocates for your brand. And again, you're creating human connection. Now, the best part about making your website more human is that you can start small. You don't need to rebuild everything from scratch or completely overhaul your brand. Adding this human touch can be as simple as changing a few key elements one at a time. Let's start with your homepage, specifically your hero section, the first thing that people see when they land on your site. Instead of a generic welcome message, try speaking directly to a challenge or an aspiration that your visitors have. For example, on my website, I don't just say, "Welcome to Inside the Square." I say, "Let's make Squarespace uniquely yours." That simple sentence will help instill a little bit of confidence in my website visitor, letting them know that when they want to customize something, they found the right place to do it. Now, your navigation is another easy place to inject some personality. One of my favorite quick wins is adding personal notes throughout your site. These can be simple callouts or side notes that share insight from your experience. On my tutorial pages, I often add little notes about the specific challenges I've encountered or shortcuts that I've discovered. These little pro tips or moments of shared experience help build that connection with my visitors, and it lets them know that AI didn't write this article, a human did. Now, your call to action buttons are another opportunity for personality. Instead of just a generic submit or learn more button, use these buttons to continue the conversation that you're having with your visitor. On a landing page, I'll include a call to action button that says send me the PDF or give me that freebie. It's a small change, but it makes the interaction feel more personal. Updating your images is also a pretty quick way to help your site feel more human. I want you to take a look at the current images that you have on your homepage. Do they feel like they could be on literally any website in your industry? If so, it might be time to replace them with some more authentic visuals. Now, this doesn't mean you need a professional photo shoot. Even candid photos of your workspace or your process can make a huge difference. Now, if you're not comfortable taking your own personal photos, there are some stock photo websites that are getting a pretty darn creative these days. And there are two of my favorites that I'll link to in the show notes at insidethesquare.co/podcast. So if you're looking to update your images and you don't want to take your own, check out the link in the show notes. Now, remember that voice that we talked about a little earlier? I want you to start paying attention to the words you use throughout your website. Are there places where you can replace industry jargon with more conversational language? Are there sections where you can share a quick story instead of just stating facts? Reviewing the voice is an easy way to add a little bit more of a human touch to the content that's there on your website. Now, no matter where you decide to start, the key here is to make these changes strategically. Pick one area of your site to focus on first. Maybe it's your about page or your service descriptions. Make that section more personal and engaging, and then pay attention to how your visitors respond. I want you to look at the data, okay? You might be surprised at which one of your changes make the biggest impact. Testing can be crucial here too. When you make these changes, ask a few of your trusted friends or even your clients to review your site and share their honest feedback. Does it feel more approachable? Is it authentically you? Are there places where the personality feels forced? These insights can help you find the right balance for your own content. So we covered a lot of ground today, my friend, but the most important takeaway is this. Your website doesn't have to choose between being professional and being personal. The magic happens when you find ways to be both, whether it's through thoughtful design elements, strategic sharing of your experience, or simply using more conversational language. Every small change that makes your site more human is a step toward better connections with your visitors. If you're feeling inspired to make your website more engaging, but you aren't sure where to start, here's one simple action you can take today. Find one section of your homepage, maybe your intro or your about section, and I want you to rewrite that section as if you're explaining what you do to a friend over a cup of coffee. Don't worry about getting it perfect, just write it naturally and then read it out loud. If it sounds like something you'd actually say in conversation, you're on the right track. That wraps it up for this episode of Think Inside the Square. Now, I mentioned quite a few resources in this episode, so to grab a link to any of those, head over to the show notes at insidethesquare.co/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you happen to be listening. Thank you so much for tuning in to Think Inside the Square, and most importantly, have fun with your website. Bye for now.